The Silk Road. We all know it as the main trade route of Eurasia. It has been the main engine of trade for many centuries. However, only a few people know what happened before him. Today, I will tell you about Sogdiana. Somewhere between the deserts of modern-day Uzbekistan and Tajikistan, under layers of sand and silence, lie the ruins of cities that were once among the richest on earth. Cities with markets that never closed. Streets where you could hear a dozen languages in a single afternoon. Warehouses packed with silk, spices, lapis lazuli, and gold. And above the city gates, not the eagle of Rome, not the crescent of Persia, not the dragon of China, but a symbol no one recognizes today. For over 1,500 years, the Sogdians were the invisible engine of the ancient world's economy. They built the Silk Road, not as a concept, not as a policy, but with their own hands, their own caravans, their own blood. They spoke a language that stretched from the Mediterranean to the Pacific. Their letters have been found buried in watchtowers on the edges of China's deserts. Their merchants sat at the tables of Chinese emperors, Persian kings, and Byzantine traders simultaneously. And yet, you've probably never heard the word Sogdia in your life. That's not an accident. It's a tragedy. This is the full story of a civilization that built the ancient world and was erased so thoroughly that even historians spent centuries arguing about whether it truly existed. It did, and what they built was extraordinary. To understand Sogdia, you first need to understand its geography, because geography is why Sogdia existed at all. Picture Central Asia, a vast, brutal landscape of steppes, mountains, and deserts. To the west, the Persian Empire. To the east, China. To the south, India. To the north, the endless Eurasian steppe, home to nomadic tribes that moved like storms. Right in the middle of all of this, sandwiched between the Amu Darya and Sirdarya rivers, in the fertile valleys between the Pamir Mountains and the Kizilkum Desert, sat Sogdia. Modern-day Uzbekistan and Tajikistan, the cities of Samarkand and Bukhara sit on the exact same ground where Sogdian cities once stood. And here's why this location was so important. It was the only viable crossing point between East and West. If you wanted to move goods from China to Persia, you had two options. You could go north through the Eurasian steppe, but that meant running into Scythians, Huns, and every nomadic tribe that ever existed. Or you could go through Sogdia. The Sogdians understood this before anyone else did. They didn't just live on the crossroads, they became the crossroads. The region itself was not one unified kingdom. Sogdia was more of a cultural and linguistic zone, a collection of city-states, each with its own ruler, but all sharing the same language, the same religion, the same script, and the same obsession with trade. The major cities were Samarkand, which the Sogdians called Marakanda, Bukhara, Panjikent, and Kish. Each city was wealthy, each city was fortified, and each city was connected to the others by a network of roads that predated what we call the Silk Road by centuries. This wasn't a primitive society. By the time Alexander the Great arrived in the 4th century BC, Samarkand was already hundreds of years old. It had libraries, it had palaces with frescoed walls, it had a sophisticated irrigation system that turned the surrounding desert into farmland. The Sogdians didn't appear from nowhere. They were the heirs of a long tradition, descended from the ancient Iranian-speaking peoples who had been settled in the region since at least the 6th century BC, possibly much earlier. But what made them unique wasn't their age. It was what they decided to do with their location. While empires around them were busy conquering, the Sogdians were busy connecting. The Sogdians were not just traders. They were one of the most culturally sophisticated civilizations of the ancient world, and their art is proof. When Soviet archaeologists excavated the ancient Sogdian city of Panjikent In the 1940s and 1950s, they found something that stunned the academic world. The walls of Sogdian palaces and wealthy homes were covered in frescoes, paintings of extraordinary quality and complexity. These weren't simple decorative patterns. They were narrative scenes, battle scenes, feasts, mythological stories, hunting parties, and crucially, trade scenes, images of merchants, caravans, exotic animals, and the goods of distant lands. The artistic style was unlike anything easily categorized. It mixed Persian elements with Indian influences, incorporated Chinese motifs, and showed clear connections to the Greek artistic tradition that had reached Central Asia through Alexander's conquest. Sogdian art was a visual record of a civilization that had absorbed the best of every culture it touched and synthesized them into something entirely its own. Their primary religion was Zoroastrianism, the ancient Iranian faith founded by the prophet Zoroaster, centered on the cosmic struggle between good and evil, light and darkness. But the Sogdians were famously tolerant. Along the Silk Road, they encountered Buddhism, Christianity, Manichaeism, and eventually Islam, and for centuries, they practiced and supported all of them simultaneously. Sogdian merchants who traveled to China brought Buddhism with them and played a significant role in introducing it to Chinese society. Sogdian translations of Buddhist texts have been found in Chinese archives. At the same time, there were Sogdian Christians, Nestorian Christians, who spread their faith eastward through the Sogdian trade network, eventually establishing churches as far away as China and Mongolia. And there were Sogdian Manichaeans, followers of the prophet Mani, whose faith blended elements of Christianity, Zoroastrianism, and Buddhism into a new synthesis. The Sogdians didn't see religious diversity as a problem. They saw it as a feature. In a civilization built on connection and exchange, the ability to understand and participate in the religious life of your trading partners was a business advantage. Their architecture reflected this openness. Sogdian cities had fire temples for Zoroastrians, Buddhist monasteries, Nestorian churches, and later mosques, all coexisting within the same city walls. Samarkand in particular was famous throughout the ancient world as a city of extraordinary beauty. The Chinese pilgrim Xuanzang, who passed through in 629 AD, described it as a prosperous city with skilled craftsmen and fierce, brave people, a place where the arts flourished and the markets were full. The Sogdians also had a sophisticated musical tradition. Sogdian music and musical instruments, particularly the lute, spread along the trade routes into China, where they became foundational to Chinese classical music. The Chinese pipa, one of the most iconic Chinese instruments, is descended from a Sogdian lute. A civilization you've never heard of gave China one of its most beloved musical instruments. This is who the Sogdians were. Not just merchants, not just middlemen. A full, rich, complex civilization with art, music, religion, literature, and a worldview shaped by 1,000 years of standing at the center of the world. The Sogdians survived a remarkable number of conquests, and the way they survived, by adapting, by integrating, by making themselves indispensable, tells you everything about who they were. The first great conqueror to arrive was Cyrus the Great of Persia in the 6th century BC. The Achaemenid Persian Empire absorbed Sogdia around 550 to 530 BC, and the Sogdians became a satrapy, a province, of the largest empire the world had seen to that point. Under Persian rule, Sogdia didn't disappear, it thrived. The Persians needed administrators, traders, and skilled craftsmen, and the Sogdians supplied all of these. They learned Persian, they adopted elements of Persian culture, but they kept their own language, their own religion, their own identity. Then came Alexander. In 329 BC, Alexander the Great swept through Sogdia on his way east, and Sogdia was not easy to conquer. The Sogdian warrior and nobleman Spitamenes led one of the most effective guerrilla campaigns in ancient history against Alexander's forces, ambushing Macedonian columns, disappearing into the desert, striking again from unexpected directions. Alexander, who had conquered the Persian Empire, Egypt, and most of the known world with remarkable speed, spent 2 frustrating years trying to fully pacify Sogdia. It was one of the toughest campaigns of his career. He eventually succeeded, partly through military pressure, partly through diplomacy, and in a move that showed both his political genius and his genuine fascination with the cultures he conquered. Alexander married a Sogdian princess named Roxana. She would become his primary wife and the mother of his heir. The conqueror of the known world chose a Sogdian woman as his queen. After Alexander's death and the fragmentation of his empire, Sogdia passed through several hands: the Seleucid Empire, then the Greco-Bactrian Kingdom, then the Kushans. Each time, the Sogdians adapted. Each time, they survived. The Kushan period, roughly the 1st to 4th centuries AD, was actually a golden age for Sogdian trade. The Kushan Empire controlled the routes between India, Central Asia, and China, and Sogdian merchants flourished within this framework. Then came the Huns, or more precisely, the Kidarites and Hephthalites, groups sometimes collectively called the White Huns. In the 4th and 5th centuries, these nomadic groups swept through Central Asia, disrupting trade routes and destabilizing the region. The Sogdians adapted again. When the Hephthalites controlled the region, Sogdian merchants negotiated with them, paid tribute where necessary, and continued trading. When the Western Turkic Khaganate replaced the Hephthalites in the late 6th century, the Sogdians formed a remarkable partnership with the Turks. The Turkic Khagans provided military protection and political stability. The Sogdian merchants provided commercial expertise and economic management. It was a symbiosis, the warriors and the traders, working together to control the Silk Road. Sogdian advisors became influential figures at the Turkic court. The Sogdian script was adapted to write the Turkic language. Some Sogdian families intermarried with Turkic nobility. And all through this, through Persian rule, Macedonian conquest, Seleucid administration, Kushan domination, Hun raids, and Turkic partnership, Sogdian merchants kept moving, kept trading, kept building their networks. By the 7th century AD, Sogdia was at the height of its cultural and commercial power. The cities were wealthy, the art was extraordinary, the trade networks stretched from Korea to Britain. And then, in less than a century, it was all gone. In 632 AD, the Prophet Muhammad died in Arabia. Within a decade, the Islamic Caliphate had conquered Persia, Egypt, and Syria. Within 2 decades, they were at the borders of Central Asia. The Arab armies that arrived at the edges of Sogdia in the mid-7th century were unlike any conqueror the Sogdians had faced before. Previous conquerors had been interested in tribute, in trade, in political control. The Arab armies came with something more, a complete system for reorganizing society. The initial Arab raids into Sogdia began in the 640s. The region resisted. Sogdian cities sent tribute to buy time. Local rulers made deals and then broke them. The situation was complicated by the fact that the region was also under pressure from the Turkic Khaganate to the north. The decisive campaigns came under the Arab general Qutayba ibn Muslim, who served as governor of Khorasan from 705 to 715 AD. Qutayba conducted a systematic military conquest of Sogdia, capturing Bukhara in 709, Samarkand in 712, and consolidating Arab control over the entire region by the time of his death in 715. The Sogdians did not give up without a fight. There were multiple uprisings, most famously the rebellion of 720 to 722 AD, when the Sogdian prince Devashtich allied with Turkic forces and launched a major revolt against Arab rule. The revolt failed. Devashtich was captured and crucified. His papers, discovered by Soviet archaeologists on Mount Mug in Tajikistan in 1932, are now among the most important sources we have for understanding Sogdian civilization in its final years. But military conquest alone did not destroy Sogdian civilization. What destroyed it was what came after. The process of Islamization and Arabization that followed the conquest was gradual, but inexorable. Over the following century, Sogdian elites converted to Islam to maintain their social position. The Sogdian language was replaced by Persian and Arabic in official contexts. The Zoroastrian fire temples were converted into mosques or demolished. The Sogdian writing system was no longer taught. The Sogdian artistic tradition, those extraordinary frescoed palaces, was incompatible with Islamic traditions regarding figurative art. By the 9th century, Sogdian as a spoken language was fading. By the 10th century, it was essentially dead as a language of daily life, surviving only in small pockets and in a few remote mountain communities. The city of Panjikent was abandoned entirely in the 8th century. Its population dispersed. Samarkand survived, but as an Islamic city with a Muslim population speaking Persian. The Sogdian Samarkand that Xuanzang had admired in 629 AD was gone. And here is what is perhaps most devastating about the end of Sogdia. It was so complete that within a few generations, the people living in the same cities, walking the same streets, farming the same land, had no memory that the Sogdians had ever existed. The Abbasid Revolution of 750 AD, which overthrew the Umayyad Caliphate, was actually supported in part by Sogdian and Persian converts to Islam, who wanted a more inclusive Islamic empire. The new Abbasid Caliphate, centered in Baghdad, did create a more cosmopolitan Islamic civilization, one in which Persian cultural elements played a huge role. But by this point, the Sogdians as a distinct people were already disappearing. They were being absorbed into the Persian-speaking Muslim world, into the Turkic world, into the new order that was reshaping Central Asia. The last speakers of Sogdian disappeared sometime in the 10th or 11th century. The last places where a form of Sogdian survived were small mountain communities in the Yaghnab Valley of modern Tajikistan. And even there, the language had evolved so far from classical Sogdian that it was essentially a different language. Today, the Yaghnabi people of Tajikistan, a few thousand people living in remote mountain villages, speak a language descended from Sogdian. They are the last living connection to a civilization that once connected the entire ancient world. For centuries after the fall of Sogdia, the civilization was essentially invisible to the outside world. Medieval Arab and Persian historians mentioned the Sogdians occasionally. As a historical footnote, a conquered people from the past. European scholars who became interested in the Silk Road in the 19th century knew the name Sogdiana, but had little concrete information about who the Sogdians actually were. Everything changed in the 20th century. The Soviet Union, which controlled the territory of ancient Sogdia, launched systematic archaeological excavations across Uzbekistan and Tajikistan. What they found exceeded all expectations. The excavations at Panjikent, begun in 1946, revealed an extraordinary sight. Panjikent was a medium-sized Sogdian city, not the largest or most important, and yet its ruins contained dozens of palatial buildings with floor space dedicated to frescoes. Room after room of paintings, depicting scenes from Sogdian mythology, daily life, feasts, battles, and stories that don't match any known literary tradition. Scholars believe these paintings illustrate stories from a Sogdian literary tradition, epic tales and myths, that was entirely lost when the language died. We can see the paintings. We cannot read the stories they tell, because those stories were never written down in a form that survived. It is one of the great losses of human cultural history. We have the illustrations for a library that no longer exists. Other archaeological sites yielded equally dramatic discoveries. At Afrasiab, the site of ancient Samarkand, archaeologists found a palace hall with frescoes depicting diplomatic missions arriving at the court of a Sogdian king. Ambassadors from China, India, Persia, Korea, and other lands are shown bringing gifts. It is a visual record of the international world the Sogdians inhabited. The Mug documents, discovered in Tajikistan in 1932, provided administrative and personal documents from the final years of Sogdian independence. Letters, contracts, administrative records, and personal correspondence, all written in Sogdian script, all dating to the early 8th century AD, the period of the Arab conquest. Reading these documents, you encounter a civilization in its final years, trying to navigate an impossible political situation, making deals, seeking alliances, desperately trying to survive. And beyond the archaeology, the Sogdian legacy is woven into the fabric of the cultures that came after them. So the script used by the last Chinese imperial dynasty traces a direct line back to Sogdian. The musical instruments they spread along the trade routes, the lute ancestors of the Chinese pipa, the Persian barbat, the Indian sitar, shaped the musical traditions of half the world. The Buddhist texts they translated and transmitted helped shape Chinese Buddhism, which then spread to Korea, Japan, and Vietnam. The Sogdians are invisible, but their fingerprints are everywhere. So why don't we know about the Sogdians? Geography plays a part. Central Asia never loomed large in the Western imagination, and the Sogdians left no pyramids or Parthenon, just frescoed cities, later buried or abandoned. Erasure plays a part too. Absorbed rather than conquered, they had no dramatic end, no last king, no final battle. They simply faded into the world forming around them. In language, Sogdian texts stayed undeciphered until the 1900s, so we knew them only through outsiders, Chinese, Arab, Greek sources, never their own voice. But now, we can read their letters, we can look at their paintings, we can trace their script through the writing systems of half of Asia, we can hear echoes of their music and instruments played today across China, Persia, and India. And what we find, when we look closely, is not just a trading people, not just merchants and middlemen. We find a civilization that understood something profound, that the world is not divided into separate competing units, but is instead a network of connections, that the most powerful position is not at the top of a hierarchy, but at the center of a web. The Sogdians didn't try to conquer the world, they tried to connect it. And for 1,500 years, they succeeded. They survived Alexander the Great. They survived the Huns. They survived a dozen different empires and political systems. They adapted, every time, without losing who they were. And somewhere in the Yaghnab Valley of Tajikistan, a few thousand people still speak a language descended from the tongue of a civilization that once made the world go round. Forgotten, erased, invisible, and yet, everywhere. That is the story of Sogdia, a civilization that deserves to be remembered. Thank you for watching. If stories like this matter to you, subscribe. Every week, another civilization history forgot, but shouldn't have.